Hello everyone, welcome to the third and final installment on the functions menu for PowerBox core and atom transmitters. In this video we're going to use our learnings from video 1 and 2 to produce a real world example of using the butterfly and crow function that you typically see used on a glider and some fixed wing aircraft. I want to make this video as a final video in this three-part series. We will touch on other functions later on in future videos, which will obviously use functions, and we'll go into in-depth explanation of those as well. However, in this video, I just wanted to wrap up with a third video just to finalize the general functions menu. Okay, moving on. Over on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see 6 servos. I have gone into my core radio and I've just basically set up a pair of aileron servos, a pair of flap servos, and these 2 servos at the bottom, they'll just basically represent our throttle position. So at the moment the stick's on low throttle, the throttle stick, being a mode 2 pilot. I have my throttle stick on the left, and then at full throttle it's just indicated with the servos moving to their full horizontal position for this particular example. So again, 0 throttle, full throttle. So later on during the video I want to show you how we'll disable the throttle for one of the flight modes where we deploy the butterfly and crow functions. Okie dokie. Moving on. I might just show you for instance the servo screen just quickly, or sorry, the function screen. You'll see here we've got aileron, flaps and throttle. And you'll notice the control sticks, we've got ailerons on stick D, so my aileron stick's on the far right hand side, and when I move my stick to the left, you'll notice the left aileron servo moves up, indicating the aileron moving up, and the right servo moves down, indicating down aileron. Obviously when we use butterfly or crow, we want these servos to move in the same direction as we move the stick. However, for this setup here, I'm just moving the aileron lever, and you'll see him sort of working as typically, normal aileron on a normal aircraft. The flaps I've just set up as just a simple configuration. I haven't got any delays or anything. You can look at previous videos of mine to work out how to enter delays for travel. I've just got 2 positions for my flaps, say that's full flaps, mid flaps and 0 flaps. And later on, of course, when we move our throttle stick, because we're going to assign the crow and butterfly function to our throttle stick, we're going to be moving the flap servos and the aileron servos with this stick, independent of the aileron and flap function. And the last function here, we've got throttle, which is my throttle stick. I've just reduced the throw, so I've just basically got, 45 degrees throw there, and that's just done in the servo menu. Again, you can look at video number 1 on the actual servo feature here, how we can do that. That's fairly simple. So that's full throttle, that's low throttle. Now, let's add a new function. So you've got your glider, you want to set up your butterfly or crow function. How do we go about doing it? Well, this is a real feature of these radios. It's probably the best feature of these radios, is how we add functions and how easy it is to incorporate some clever mixing and combining of servos into one function. On a lot of other radios, I won't mention any brands, it can actually become quite difficult. You have to play around with certain mixers or certain inbuilt menus. The core and atom don't have a menu for, say, crow. Yeah, you make your own crow or butterfly function. So let's see how truly easy it is to do this on this type of radio. Now, if you've programmed other radios, you'll be able to look at the 2 methods of programming after you've gone through this video, and you'll be able to compare for yourself how easy it is to do it on the PowerBox radios using their operating system versus, say, doing it on another radio. Okay, let's add a new function. So we're going to call this function crow because it's got less characters compared to the word butterfly, so I don't have to type as long. Simple as that. And at the moment there's no servos assigned, we don't have any curves assigned, we don't have any stick assigned. But let's assign the crow function to our throttle stick here. So remember, typical glider, you'll be normally using this for your throttle. So you can see the servos moving, representing our throttle movement. So again, full throttle, low throttle. However, for the crow function, we're going to use this to adjust the amount of crow. So basically, as we move this stick up, our flap should come down, so these servos should move down. And the aileron servos should both move in the same direction, in the upwards direction, to give us the butterfly or crow effect. At the moment, you'll notice only our throttle servos moving. Now, one other thing, before I started this video, I did program in 3 flight modes, so just to show you. We've got a standard flight mode. I've also got a couple of others. I've got a flight mode 1, a flight mode 2, and I've also got a crow flight mode, which is in a slightly higher priority compared to FM1 and FM2. So FM1, FM2 is just simply triggered with this switch here. So basically I've got FM1 position, FM2. I've also got the standard position when it's fully back. And no matter what position this switch is in, I can select crow, say on landing when I'm coming in, just by flipping that switch there. I've only just set up the switches just so it's easy for me to show you on the video. So there's our crow position when I have this switch in the center position. Simple as that. So we've got our flight modes set up. However, we're not using them to switch anything at this point in time. So no matter if I'm in the crow position at the moment, you'll just see that if I move the throttle still works. My ailerons still work as normal, and the flaps deploy as normal. So the crow flight mode at the moment is doing absolutely nothing. Now, one of the things to be aware of is when we activate crow flight mode, we don't want the throttle to work on our motor anymore. So if you've got an electric glider or a turbine glider or whatever, we basically want the throttle cut back to 0. So you're coming in for a landing, you don't want any motor. You just basically want to control the braking effect using your crow or butterfly function. And I know a lot of glider pilots will like to use the same stick. So our first aim is to disable the throttle, so the throttle or the motor, when we're in the crow flight mode position. How do we do that? Well, let's select crow. So we're in flight mode crow now, so hopefully you can read the screen okay. I know the screen's a bit small in this video. Just might have to play it back on your TV rather than your mobile phone. So we're in the crow flight mode. Now at the moment we haven't set up anything in the flight mode. All we need to do is we go into the throttle function and select the curve feature. So we go into the function curves for our throttle. Now remember, we've got 2 servos indicating our throttle position. So when we go into the function curve, it'll impact both of those servos. Now, I've already set this to single. So the default is global. So remember in one of the previous videos I mentioned when we're on global, it impacts all flight modes. So we need to set that to single. And now each one of these settings will be basically independent of each flight mode. So we have a curve here. So we've got a linear curve, which is basically minus 100 to plus 100% from left to right of the throttle stick, indicating our normal output. So basically in the middle, we've got our neutral position, or typically our neutral position, then you've got minus 100, plus 100. Now you notice the servos moving, indicating full throttle and low throttle. How do we stop that? Well, very simple. All we need to do is basically take this diagonal line and basically have a convert it to a flat line running along the bottom at minus 100. So minus 100 is basically our 0 throttle position. So all we need to do is just edit the curve, go to a basic 3-position curve. Now ensure that you're in the crow flight mode position, because we don't want a 0 throttle in the other flight mode positions. We can say move to the center point, highlight the value, and then we just hold it down and take it down to minus 100%. Move to the full throttle point. Same thing, let's reduce that down to minus 100. So now we have a flat line running around or across the minus 100% horizontal. And if you notice the blue line on the graph, which indicates our throttle stick position, mimics my throttle movement. However, you notice the servos are not doing anything. They're just basically stuck at 0 throttle. So in other words, motor off. Let's OK. Let's go back 1 or even 2. So now we've got no throttle in the Crow flight mode. If I flick to one of the other flight modes, if we look at the curves, I'll just show you that again. So I'll go back to Crow. The horizontal lines at the bottom there. Moving the stick does nothing. If we flick it back to, say, standard flight mode, we now have throttle control. If I go to, say, flight mode 1, FM1, we still have that normal diagonal line there, giving us minus 100 to plus 100% movement on the axis there, and we have normal throttle control. And same with flight mode 2, no problem. Flick into Crow, no control. So even if we're, say, at full throttle, I flick into Crow, the motor basically reduces to 0 throttle. Okay, so that disables our motor. Easy as that. This programming feature with the flat line at a certain position is really handy. You can use it for all sorts of other things as well. But using it on a throttle is very common for lots of models, not just for a glider. Okay, we're in flight mode 1. I'll just go back to standard, go back to our function screen. So we've set up our throttle. We don't really have to do anything more with the throttle. The throttle is programmed now. It was easy as that. Now, our Crow function. We want Crow in the Crow function. So let's move our switch to the Crow flight mode, because we're going to program the Crow flight mode, or basically the function in that flight mode. First thing we need to do is assign a stick for our Crow function. Now remember, we're going to use stick A here, my throttle stick. So you notice stick A is already controlling the throttle. However, we've killed the throttle here. So stick A does nothing as far as the throttle is concerned for the Crow flight mode. So therefore, we can pinch this stick and use it for our Crow function. And at the moment it does not do anything because we don't have any servos programmed into this function. So again, this is a real advantage with this function layout here in the PowerBox core and atom transmitters. It's very, very flexible, extremely flexible. Now, let's have a look. This is a real tricky thing. A lot of radios can't do this, so you'll notice we've got our aileron servos are 1 and 2, flap servos 3 and 4. I have some Futaba radios, for instance, and it gets tricky if you want to reuse these servos in another function, because you don't have the same control as you do with PowerBox core and atom radios. Remember from my previous video, whenever we reuse a servo in another function, we have full control of that servo as far as its travel is concerned, as far as its servo matching capabilities. A lot of radios don't offer those features. So you might have a function menu in another radio, but it's nowhere near as flexible as the core and atom radios. So it's a really good idea to really understand the function menu. It's the best part of the radio, really. Second would be the telemetry features, but that's just my opinion. Okay, now for our Crow or butterfly function, what do we need to do with this stick? We need to control 4 servos. We need to control the 2 aileron servos as well as the flap servos. So let's enter them here under the Crow function. So this is pretty simple. We select the aileron left servo, aileron right servo, the flap left servo, flap right servo, hit an OK, and you'll notice the servos will do some crazy thing now because it's using default throws, default directions. Remember from my first video, the limit and the center points are fixed across all the functions. So if you adjust the center point, say in this menu, it'll also adjust it in the other menus. Now normally you don't, once you set these, the limits and the center points, you don't have to readjust them. Or normally you wouldn't adjust them for any reason. Now I can use, for this example, I can just leave it on the default throws of 50%. That'll do for this example. However, you can see it's automatically populated the servos in here. So if I go back one screen, you'll notice here we now have servos 1, 2, 3 and 4 in here. Ailerons 1 and 2, flaps 3 and 4. So let's move my aileron stick, and you'll notice the ailerons respond, even though they're not in the right position, you'll notice they're moving in the same aileron direction. So if I go left aileron, the left aileron servo's moving sort of upwards, and the right aileron's moving down, and vice versa. So they're still moving in the right direction, and of course they're using the correct throws, even though they're offset at the moment. And that's because when I move the stick, I'm really just controlling this aileron function, which has not been changed. And the same goes with the flaps as well. However, in the crow function, remember we're using stick A, we're in the crow mode, or crow flight mode, so this stick does not control the throttle. However, it's now controlling servos 1, 2, 3 and 4. Let's see what happens when I move the stick. Okay, so we've got the servos moving in all sorts of directions, but we're going to fix that in a second with a couple of button presses. But you can see that all 4 servos are now controlled with my throttle stick, yet the throttle's not being controlled, because remember we had that flat line in this particular flight mode. Okay, let's make sure, if I go to center stick, you'll notice the servos will be in their normal position. So this is where I can show you my aileron movement, still normal. And if I go back to flaps, standard flaps. So with the throttle in the center, basically that's the center travel of all the functions, and therefore the servos just line up. Now, let's play around with the direction. So the first thing we probably want to set is the direction of travel for the servos. So let's go into the crow function, click on the servos. And remember from my first video how we can change the direction just by long pressing on this little box here which says normal. So let's have a look at our left aileron servo. So this servo over here, if I move my crow or butterfly stick forwards, so towards the top of the radio, basically the aileron should move upwards. So you notice the left servo is moving in the correct direction, up. If I bring the throttle stick down, it moves down. If I go up, it moves up. However, the right aileron servo is moving in the wrong direction. So let's fix that. So we go to aileron right, just hold it down on normal, and now let's see what happens. Now we're getting somewhere. Now they're moving in the same direction. So that's up aileron, that's the center point, that's down aileron. Just ignore the down aileron bit, because normally you wouldn't use that in the crow function. However, we'll fix that up a little bit later in this video. Again, it's very easy to do. Let's concentrate on the flap servo. So our flap servos are going the wrong way as well. One of them is anyway. So if I move the stick up again, basically the flaps should move down, opposite to the ailerons. So the right flap servo is moving correct, however the left flap servo is moving in the wrong direction. So let's scroll down to the servo number 3, which is our flap L or left flap servo. Let's reverse its travel. Let's see what happens now. That's a lot better. So if I go to center stick, indicating our center position for our stick, which gives us our neutral point for our servos. So in other words, ailerons are centered, flaps are in their 0 degree position. If I move my stick up, notice the flaps go down and the ailerons go up, which is exactly what we want for crow. Again, move the stick up, flaps down, ailerons up. Simple as that. Now, there's a problem here because I've got my stick at center. If I go below center, they go in the opposite direction, which is generally, we don't really want that normally. So we've got to fix that. Again, that's really easy to do. And also remember our throttle. Remember our 2 throttle servos indicating our throttle position? Not working, which is exactly what we want. So all we need to do now is basically manipulate our curve for this function so it only operates from the normal neutral position of the flaps and ailerons and then forwards. However, we want the throttle stick to start at low stick, so the servos are in neutral at low stick. How do we do that? Well, that's pretty easy. Let's move back to our functions menu. Go back into the curve for the crow function. So this is the actual function curve. So now when we manipulate this curve, it's going to affect all our servos. So you notice the blue cursor, if you look carefully on the screen, blue cursor in the center is basically the servos in their neutral position or normal non-deployed position. And you'll notice the value of the servos is resting on the horizontal, basically our 0% rate. So below that's negative 100%, or sorry, 0 to negative 100. Above it is the positive 0 to 100% travel. So what we need to do is basically have this curve starting on the left-hand side, which is full low stick, at the horizontal line of 0%. So all we need to do here is basically move this point up to there. And then we just bump up the center point to the midpoint here, which will be 50%. And then this point can stay at positive 100% travel. Okay, so let's edit the curve. So go into edit. All we need to do is select a very basic 3-point curve. We're not doing servo matching or anything silly like that. You'll notice the left-hand point curve, you may not be able to see that. It's highlighted red now. Let's change its value. And you'll notice we're at low stick, so our cursor, our little blue cursor's there. So when I move that value now, you should see the servos move. And they'll both move, flap and ailerons should move towards their neutral position, which is right there. Now, of course, we've got a horizontal line now going from there to there. So at the bottom stick or bottom half of the travel, it's not going to do anything, which is what we don't want. So let's move over to the center position and let's bump this point up to 50% travel. So that basically gives us a linear response. You don't have to have a linear response. I'm just showing you a linear response. So now we have this curve that's offset. So it's basically starting at the 0% here, not at negative 100. So that's at low stick. This is at mid stick. And that's at full throttle stick travel, or sorry, our crow stick travel. And that gives us our 100% movement. So now we've got a truly acting butterfly crow function on this stick with no throttle movement at all. So notice the flaps are moving down and ailerons are moving up as I move the stick forwards or up in the up position. Simple as that. Now, one other trick here, I'll show you now while we're in this menu, is at the moment I've got a rate of 100% for this function. You can, of course, select a slider or even a rotary encoder to control the rate. So this might be handy when you're first flying a brand new model and you want to fine-tune your deployment of your crow and butterfly function. So basically, you activate it, you're in crow flight mode, you're flying around, and you might find you've got X amount of rate and you might want less rate or whatever. You can use the potentiometer to change it. And how we do that is you'll notice, or if you remember in the previous video, I told you how to set these. So if I move the rotary encoder, not a potentiometer, I keep forgetting. If I move it fully counterclockwise or anti-clockwise, let's reduce the rate to say, I mean, we could go to say 20% or whatever. I might say, let's go to 0. So that'll give us no crow or no butterfly. So at the moment, you'll notice we've got nothing. We can then move on to the center position of the rotary encoder, which is highlighting box number 2 in green. Let's adjust this value to say 50%, which will give us half travel. So at the center of this rotary encoder, it will give us 50% rate. And then as I rotate it fully clockwise, we have our default, say 100% throw. So while you're flying around, you deploy your, say your crow and butterfly function. You've got your 0 to 100% rate. You might find that's too much. And you can actually dial it back to suit. And maybe on the conditions of the day, you want to adjust it. You can do that with a slider or a rotary encoder. So that gives you some fine tunability, if you like, rather than just having a fixed value. If you're maintaining an aircraft or a glider, you might want to use this to set a particular value at, say, full stick, fine tune it with this, and when you land, you can then employ that as a fixed value. So if you don't want to use the slider or the rotary encoder to control it in future flights. Simple as that. Now, we've done pretty much everything at the moment except for one little thing. So hopefully you've guessed what it is. And it's the fact that at the moment we're in crow mode. So we've got normal crow or butterfly functionality, no throttle. However, if we flick out of crow mode and we go, say, back to our standard flight mode, you'll notice we still have the crow and butterfly function feature activated, which is what we don't want. Because at the moment you've got ailerons, you've got the flaps. We just basically want normal aileron and flap movement with the motor. So, what do we need to do? Now, remember, we're still on global. So when we program the crow up, or the crow function, we've programmed this function across all flight modes, which is what we don't want. We only want this feature, the butterfly and crow feature or function, only active in the crow flight mode position. So let's go to single here. Actually, before we do that, I might just make it a little bit easier. I'll change this to a single position again, single control rate. So here if you just wanted a fixed control rate, you just basically go in here and set a particular value, 80%, and that'll be fixed. You can't vary that. Okay, I'll leave it on the default 100. We're in global mode. Let's go to single. Now, the reason I went to the fixed control rate is if we had the rotary dial set up and I go to single, it'll copy across all the settings on positions 1, 2, and 3. So you have to adjust the rate for all those 3 positions for every single flight mode. And you don't really want to do that. So I just set a single rate of 100%. Go to single. And now we just have to reprogram the curve up. So just go OK, go edit, and all we need to do is just enter this menu, go back out, and you'll notice it's copied it across. So I didn't actually have to adjust the curve for that. And now this is in the single mode, so we're in the crow flight mode. We have to disable this feature in the other flight modes. Let's go and select, say, our normal or standard flight mode. And you'll notice if I move the stick, the throttle stick, we've got not only throttle, we still have our crow and butterfly function. However, we're in the standard flight mode. We don't want that. So all I need to do is basically reduce this rate down to 0, which will in effect kill that function. Let's see what happens now. We're at 0% rate. We're in standard flight mode. And I've just got normal throttle control, I've got my normal ailerons, and I've got my normal flap control. Simple as that. And we do the same thing for every other flight mode. So for instance, in flight mode 1, you'll notice again, we've got the crow function activated or active in this flight mode. We don't want that. Let's go back to 0%. And now we've got no butterfly or crow function in this flight mode. Same for flight mode 2, rate to 0%. And again, we now just have our normal motor control. We still have our aileron control. We have our flap control. Very good. And, you know, whenever you want to activate the butterfly and crow function, you flick into that flight mode. So we're now in the crow flight mode. Throttle's disabled, and we have our crow feature activated or active. So again, if I was going to use the rotary control, I would program this bit first, now go in and do the rotary control, because now you can set positions 1, 2, and 3 without impacting the other positions in the other flight modes. Just makes it a bit easier, that step. Cool. Well, hopefully you've enjoyed this video. And like I said, this basically is the last of this 3 series of videos for the function menu. It's really an introduction to the function menu. You can do a lot more complicated stuff as well. You can gang up a lot more servos depending on what you want to do. And there'll be future videos showing you this for certain types of functions we want to activate on aircraft. Like for instance, I've had a request on people asking me, or how do we do, say, a knife edge mix, where you mix, rudder and ailerons, etc. And you'll find in here, in this radio, you'll notice there's also a mix menu. So not only have we got functions, which sort of do a form of mixing, however, we do have a standalone mixer menu, which is very similar to the functions, or the function menu. Except, the main thing to remember is a mixer mixes functions together, not servos. So going back to our functions, if you look in the functions menu, in reality the functions menu allows you to set up all the controls and that with multiple servos. It allows you to in effect mix servos together. So for instance here for our crow function we've got servos 1, 2 and 3 and 4, yet we're also using 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 other separate functions. So it's a form of mixing. It's a more complex form, or a form that allows you a lot more flexibility. That's probably the proper term. However, in some situations, you want to mix, say, 2 functions together. You sort of could do it in here as well, but sometimes it's just easier to do it within the mixer menu. Because say you had multiple servos on a flight surface, you don't really want to program each servo again for the mixer. You would come into here and mix the 2 functions together. So I'll just quickly show you something. So, oops, not in there. Oh yeah, sorry, in there. You'll notice here we've got from and to. So if I select from, it only allows us to select from a function that we've already programmed. There's no servos here because it mixes functions to a function. And that's the way the mixer works on this radio. And again, I'll show you some examples later on, where you typically would use these things on certain aircraft in a future video. All right. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you've learned something from it, even if it's just one little thing that you weren't aware of. Or, in some cases, sometimes, if you want to drop us some feedback, just put a comment up on the video channel, and I'll take that on board for future videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in a future video. Thank you all.